So as we finish up the series, I want to sort of go back and forward at the same time to where we started of what environmental education means within education's larger landscape and climate right now. And right now we are very much in the standardization era of education. Um, we've discussed this view of education as a private good, but really since the 80s, we've been in this era of standardized education, both in assessment, standards, and so we really want to discuss what environmental ed means in this current context. The first point that we just have to be honest about, and is someone who's been involved in environmental education for I guess longer now than I probably want to admit to. In the standardization era, that which is assessed gets the greatest attention. Right. And that is really primarily reading and math and a lot of grades. But although I personally wish environmental topics were among those getting great attention, that's just the reality of those that which are assessed, and especially which are assessed in formats that are used for evaluating schools are going to get the greatest attention. And so we have to recognize that and realize that that very much in all likelihood means that environmental topics are just getting less attention. They're not happening elsewhere, and so we want to be conscious of that. The other thing is that standardization is really the antithesis of place consciousness. And because of standardization, the curricula that we get in schools are really probably never going to lead to deep, meaningful environmental experiences, right? So setting aside that environmental topics just don't receive a lot of attention, where they do, if a curriculum is standardized, it's not going to, it's very unlikely to lead to meaningful experiences, right? Because it cannot focus on what a topic looks like in your community. One of the examples that stands out to me so much, again, living in Western Kansas, I was, it's been several years ago, but I was in a school, happened to be in one where my wife teaches, and at the end of the day, I heard an announcement, they get on, they do all the announcements of, these kids come to office, all that, something about if you'd like to go to the concession stand or whatever to support our reforestation project. And I kind of paused for a moment, like, did I just hear that say reforestation project? And so I asked my wife after, that evening, I said, did I hear the announcement say that they're doing a fundraiser for a reforestation project? She goes, yeah. I said, did they realize this in Western Kansas was never forest to start with? She goes, no, but the curriculum has a reforestation project, right? Because the curriculum was actually out of California, and a reforestation project in California probably makes a lot of sense. In Western Kansas, that was prairie, never forest to start with. It doesn't, right? The more appropriate topic may have been native plant restoration, right? Native plant makes a lot of sense a lot of places, but reforestation was not it. And in fact, reforestation communicated a negative message about the place in which they were, because it sent the message of, oh, if you want to improve what's now grass, you should plant it as trees, right? So actually, what's native here isn't as good, right? So curricula that are standardized are never going to get to meaningful experiences because they're not standardized for a particular school, for a particular place, definitely not for a particular landscape. And that's why as educators, we just have to be very intentional about realizing that's the case and working to make the modifications we need to make sure our students still have meaningful experiences. one of the things I think is really critical in getting to this idea of back to the idea of gestalts and the person and place together is that we are teachers in a particular place, right? I don't need to be a teacher that'd be great anywhere. I need to be great where I'm at. Also, who I am as a teacher is because of where I am. I need to let the landscape around me help make me as a teacher. I need to recognize that how it shapes me, how the community I am in shapes me as an educator, both the social community, the ecological community. As educators, we are in particular places. We get the opportunity to contribute to those places. We get those opportunities that aren't typically in the standardized era seized upon. And I think that's something that's really powerful. And very much something we want to make sure we take advantage of, right? You do not need to be a good teacher or design a good lesson for anywhere. You need to be great for where you are and for the specific students that are in front of you. And so as you're thinking about environmental education, there are some times that there's lessons that you're like, well, this would only work here with this group of students. Wonderful. That's all it needs to work for, right? If someone else looks at your lesson and says, oh, I couldn't do that with my students because their needs and skills are different. I couldn't do that where I'm at because the particulars of my school, our community, our setting wouldn't allow for it. That's fine, right? It just needs to work where you are. It just needs to be great for your students. It just has to work once, right? I think there's this kind of in the standardized era, there's this prevailing mindset of, oh, a good lesson is something that should be repeatable for a lot of students and, could work anywhere. And that's just not what we need. We need a great, meaningful experience for the particular students in front of us. John Dewey says that essentially what any educator should do is what the best and wisest parent would do for their own children. My kids have definitely not given me that label of best and wisest parent. But I mentioned in a prior video that we're just a few weeks back after a family trip to Rocky Mountain National Park, right? There were things we did in that trip, especially in having a 1-year-old, that were set up to match the needs of our kids, right? So one of the things that I'm really proud of course, with a trip like that, as someone who works in environmental ed, I definitely overthink what it is we're doing. But one of the aspects of that experience I'm really proud of is right, I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old who are really pretty experienced in the outdoors, right? They've also been to that national park. I think we counted up 10 or 11 times, right? They've been there quite a bit. And then a 1-year-old. And so one of the aspects of that trip that I was really proud of is within that national park, there's elk exclosures, so areas that they fenced off for vegetation restoration, a lot of willows. So they fenced elk out. Now, as a visitor, you're welcome to go in those. They have gates. You can go in, just you close the gate behind you to keep the elk out. And those are typically down in the valleys, in the meadows, so a lot of grass. And so the thing I wanted for the 1-year-old was just the sensory experience of being able to toddle around, pick up rocks, look at flowers, that sort of thing. And that made a great spot for it because, it's soft grass. When he fell over, he's in soft grass. There's this little creek. He could pick up rocks in the edge of the creek. He really liked they were cold and wet. Right, it matched his skill. For my 11-year-old and 8-year-old, it also gave them a chance that they could go explore on their own, right? Because they know that park pretty well, but they've not been in charge of their own decisions really before, right? They've always gone with me. We've always been together. It's always been a group thing. And so what I really wanted them to do was to sort of be on their own and explore more. So for them, we said, okay, do not leave the exclosure, right? And the exclosure is fairly large, right? It's quite a lot of space. Do not cross the river. Do not leave the exclosure. right? So they got the experience of exploring on their own, and it was wonderful to watch from a distance. Now, that combination of 1-year-old being able to grab cold rocks out of a stream, 11-year-old and 8-year-old being able to explore on their own was perfect for our family. Last week, my wife mentioned, I've made a lot of trips to Rocky Mountain National Park, led high school students, taking college students out there, right? And so it's somewhere I know really well. She said, "Oh, I have a friend from work that they're making their first trip out there, and they wanted some tips, right? They have an almost 1-year-old." And as perfect as this one particular activity was for our family, so I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't really match their need, right? With just a 1-year-old, they could do things a bit differently. And so I gave her a few spots of like, okay, maybe they ought to think about going to blank, 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 right? The fact that this idea from my family wasn't replicable for someone else, that it wasn't the right thing for them, doesn't matter. It needed to be the right thing for us. And in our work as educators, it's absolutely the same way. We need to do what is right for our students. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't work for other students. It doesn't matter, it's not standardized. It doesn't matter if it is complicated. It needs to be meaningful for the students that are in front of us. I do want to be sure to share my contact information. Ultimately, environmental education is not easy work. I applaud you if you've made it to this point in this video. I applaud you for the effort you're putting into it. It's something that's a continual challenge in figuring out what works for particular students. Students are very much moving targets in terms of what their needs and interests are. The environmental challenges are moving targets. And so we're, as environmental educators, we're working in a space in which many of the things we're attempting to do are moving. And I think that challenge is both frustrating, but also incredibly rewarding. Obviously, the work that we're doing is incredibly important. I want to thank you for the effort you've invested. And, with my contact information, ask that if there are things I can do to help in this work, please do not hesitate to reach out.